Hello everyone and welcome to the Partnership on Maternal Newborn Child Health Adolescent Youth Constituency Induction Program. In short, we are going to call ourselves PMNCH AYC. We are so excited to engage with you as one of our AYC new members that has just come on board. Now here's a presentation to give you a good understanding on our structure, strategy, and governance. The next slide, please. Now, you see from this presentation, we will give you an overview on PMNCH and AYC, our strategy and work plan, as well as the structure and governance. Now, this next slide gives you an overview on where exactly PMNCH started and how it started. It was launched in 2005 in India and looked at focusing and advancing sexual reproductive maternal and newborn child and adolescent health consortium of care approach. It was basically an initial mandate to accelerate achievement of the Millennium Development Goal 5, 4, and 5 in 2015 transition to be the partnership in support of the Every Woman in Every Child movement. By December 2016, it united 860 partner organizations collaborating across 10 constituencies, which you'll hear about as we go along the presentation. The next slide, please. Here you see an overview on the SRMNCAH Consortium of Care. Yes, that's a handful, but it basically covers the whole consortium of the different issues that we look like through household, community outreach, and the health facilities. The next slide, please. Now on this slide, you get to see what our vision and the mission is all about. Well, to touch it all, the vision looks at every woman, child, and adolescent in every setting realizes their rights to physical and mental health and well-being, has social and economic opportunities, and is able to participate fully in shaping prosperous and sustainable societies. And you can see further from the slide that you have the mission there and what it looks like and what we focus on as well. Next slide, please. Here we have the guiding principles. So if you're trying to figure out how exactly do we do how we do it, this gives you a good overview. We're all about being partner-centric, by supporting partners to deliver the partnership objectives without replacing or replicating partners' work or their internal governance or accountability process. We're also looking into focusing on convening. This is providing a platform for partners to discuss and agree on ways to align their existing and new activities. Number 3, being driven by country demand and regional priorities. And this basically looks at more of the bottom-up approach, looking at what's happening at a country level and supporting and strengthening that. And 4th, promoting the consortium of care approach that we just previously talked about to improve women's and children's health. Next slide, please. Now, here we have an overview of the 10 constituencies that work across PMNCH. You see from these constituencies that all are, well, we have ART, DFD, and F, and you're probably figuring out what does this stand for. So I'll give you a quick overview what the 10 constituencies are all about and what they represent. So the first one is on the partner countries, and then we have the donors and foundations, and you have the intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, academic research and training institutions, the AYC, which is us, the Adolescent Youth Constituency, and you have the private sector, the United Nations Agency, and global financing mechanisms. So you can see that PMNCH is a one-stop shop for all constituencies as catalysts of change to maximize impact in SRMNCAH through collective action, analysis, alignment, advocacy, and accountability. Next slide, please. So now with the next few slides, you kind of have an overview on like how the partnership has been growing and the different members that are in there. So if you could just go through that. So you have an overview on how the growth has been and the different constituencies that are there and how big each constituency is as well, and how we fall across the region as well in terms of membership of our partners and the constituency. Next slide, please. So you have just joined the partnership and you should have received an email from one of our board members basically introducing you to the AYC program. But if you ever want more information about the different constituency, here you have a link to the website that you can visit. Next slide, please. Looking at engagement opportunities. Engagement through constituencies, engagement through the partner-centric approach, and engagement in the governance system. When we talked about a partner-centric approach, this is how PMNCH operates. You see that there is members within the community of practice, and then we have steering groups that basically work on the different strategic objectives, which we'll look at further, which are led by co-conveners. And then you also have the strategic objective managers who are basically coordinating across the different strategic objectives. Next slide, please. Now, let's look at the strategy and the work plan. So here we have the Every Woman and Every Child framework, because I'm sure you're trying to understand how the partnership is working through the Every Woman and Every Child movement. So countries are the lead drivers to implement unique national plans. There are three pillars to support country-led implementation: the technical support within the H6, the financing, which is a global financing facility, and others, and thirdly, accountability, which is at the unified accountability framework. Next slide, please. So, as you can see from this slide, we're now trying to see how the alignment actually looks like from PMNCH and Every Woman, Every Child. And if you just take your time to actually see what we're all about, I'm sure you've always heard PMNCH talking about survive, thrive, and transform. And this table here basically gives you an overview on aligning our actions for better results within the Every Woman and Every Child framework. Next slide. Yeah?
6 pillars.
So, looking at the, yeah?
Just naming them.
Okay. So within this slide, we have the 6 pillars, which is early childhood development, adolescent health and well-being, quality, equity, and dignity in services, sexual and reproductive health and rights, empowerment of women, girls, and communities, and lastly, humanitarian settings. Next slide, please. Now, let's look more in depth about the strategic objectives. Looking at implications of the new positioning of the alignment with Every Woman and Every Child, and looking at one of our strategic objectives, which is deepening partnership, the main objectives for this was to fit for purpose to deliver with the Sustainable Development Goals, global strategy, and the partnership's strategic plan, reflecting place in global architecture, including related to the global financing facility and H6, and improve decision-making and strengthen engagement. And you can see below the anticipated impact that we are looking towards. Next slide, please. So now here on this slide, we have more or less an overview of the mandate of the board of the partnership. And it can be understood in 2 main dimensions. The first one is the support of the Every Woman, Every Child movement, and secondly, govern the partnership as an organizational entity. And you've seen there further that the board further gives voice to each sector and provides a space for achieving consensus. And then secondly, monitoring the effectiveness of all sectors in achieving the goals of the global strategy and promote action for redress through the Unified Accountability and Secretariat support to the International Accountability Panel. With this slide, now we have the implication on work. The partnership organizes and mobilizes in alignment to how it relates to the Every Woman, Every Child framework. So as you can see here, how the alignment will look at around Sustainable Development Goals, the Global Strategy on Women, Children, and Adolescent Health, the Partnership Strategic Plan, the Partnership's Business Plan, as well as the Partnership's Annual Work Plan. The partnership deploys its core functions of alignment, analysis, accountability, and advocacy in full support of the 2030 Survive, Thrive, and Transform targets of the global strategy. So now you can see how the different strategies all come together into one. Moving on to the 4 A's, which were the alignment, advocacy, analysis, and accountability. Now, women, children, and adolescents in every setting realize their rights to physical and mental health and well-being, achieving the vision of the global strategy and the SDGs, and leaving no one behind. So with this 4 A's, it's all about leadership and collective action platform, engaging partners in health and interrelated sectors, led by an inclusive board, served by an effective secretariat. Next slide, please. Let's look at the 4 strategic objectives that I was referring to earlier. The first strategic objective is prioritize engagement in countries. The second one is drive accountability. The third one is focus action for results, which is more into advocacy. And the fourth one is on deepen partnership. Now, these strategic objectives will be things that will be directing us from 2016 to 2020. Next slide, please. So now, before I go into depth with everything else that we're doing, you'll hear from our colleagues talking more about the adolescent health component. So within the different strategic objectives, adolescent health is a core component that we'll be looking at, and you'll hear more about this from our colleagues during our induction program. So here we have the big 4 tickets that you just saw previously, and you can just have a look at it and understand it, and it'll be shared in detail later. Let's look at the structure and governance. Now here we have a diagram that looks at the general structure for PMNCH. To your left you have a list of all the 10 constituencies that I earlier mentioned, and to your right you have the structure of the PMNCH board, the executive committee, and the different working groups. Under that you have the finance committee, the ad hoc working groups, governance and nomination committee as well. And below there you also see the strategic objective working groups, and PMNCH, if you didn't know, is basically operated, and the secretariat is under the World Health Organization. So this basically gives you an overview of the general structure for PMNCH. Next slide, please. Now, the PMNCH board has got 1 chair and 2 vice chairs. So from every constituency, you have a chair, and they have 2 vice chairs that are appointed to represent the particular constituency. Board members speak for their constituencies, and as being a member of the adolescent youth constituency, you're able to give in views and anything that you want your board chair to take up during any PMNCH board meeting that takes place. And the balance within the board representation is more on geographical and the expertise that one will have across SRMNCAH CAH, the health systems, all the cross-cutting issues, and they usually meet twice a year and virtually if needed. And decisions that are always taken up during board meetings are usually based on a consensus way. Moving on to the next slide. Now here you have an understanding of the roles and the membership of the governing bodies. So you see here what is the role of the board members, and then right below that you also see what is the role of the executive committee. Next slide, please. Furthermore, from the structure you saw, we had the finance committee. And the finance committee provides proactive strategic recommendation on the budget and the work plans and other financial proceedings that support the overall mission and strategic objectives of the partnership. You'll find that within each constituency, they come up with their own work plans that they'll be working on, and the finance committee usually is there to basically support that process as well. At least one member must have strategic finance and accounting expertise, and at least one member must have fundraising expertise. So you find that within our AYC, some of the constituencies that looks at finance of the partnership, we do actually request an adolescent youth constituency member to be part of that as well, to represent that committee as well. Next slide, please. Now, looking at the roles and membership of the governing bodies, again, we have the Governance and Nomination Committee. Now, they look into improving governance effectiveness. They oversee nomination processes. So, for example, if you want to be nominated as the next board chairperson, they oversee that. And they address governance questions that may arise. The membership is composed of a representative from each constituency. Next slide, please. Now, each constituency has a focal point within the Secretariat to support the constituency work and chair. With our constituency, I'm sure you've seen emails with someone written Mimi there, and she is currently our lead focal point person who's supporting our Secretariat. Governance and partnership teams within the Secretariat supports PMNCH governance, constituency management, and partner engagement. The Secretariat Executive Director and Deputy Executive Director oversees all board and partner engagement. Next slide, please. So if you're still trying to figure out everything I just said to you, you're free to get more information from the website here. As you can see on this slide, where you'll also be able to find a board manual and membership and constituency management guidelines, a board member's handbook. But if you have any other questions you'd like to ask, you would have received emails from our AYC board chairperson. Feel free to email them to get any other clarification and guidance of anything you need to know. And that's basically a good overview and introduction on PMNCH and AYC. Moving on, now that you've got a touch on who we are, what we do, and how we function, I want to give it up to Mimi, who's going to now take us through more on the landscape on sexual, reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, and adolescent health, looking at the priority issues, as well as a closer look on the adolescent health and well-being component. Over to you, Mimi.
Thanks, Tikala. I'm going to give a very short presentation on challenges and opportunities for women's, children, and adolescent health. And then my colleague Cecilia will be diving more into the political and technical tools that are available at the global level. Just to give you a bit of context, today's global health context is very different from the landscape that immediately followed the launch of the first global strategy for women's, children's, and adolescent health in 2010. There was a lot of energy created for this first global strategy that led to a multitude of efforts, achieving results, but also making the landscape very complex. Despite progress, challenges still remain. We still see that we are losing mothers, adolescents, and children to preventable causes. We see that illness, disability, and failure to reach their full potential, and yet we can be very optimistic as we have several opportunities to end preventable deaths. We can also push not just for surviving, but also for thriving and transforming on the agenda. And we have great potential given that the current cohort of adolescents is the largest in history. So just to give you a bit of an overview of the latest data based on recent tools such as the AHA, which you'll hear more about, the Accelerated Action for Health Among Adolescents. We see now that maternal, newborn, child, and adolescent deaths are reducing from preventable causes. Just on adolescents specifically, we saw that 1.3 million adolescents died in 2012 from preventable or treatable causes. We also saw that suicide and complications during pregnancy and childbirth are currently the leading causes of death in adolescent girls aged 15 to 19. Regarding mortality reduction and good health, this cannot be achieved without health-enhancing sectors. We're seeing now more than ever, it's not, we can't just work only in the health sector, but in communities and families. And so we've seen through most recently that 50% of child deaths are due to pneumonia. So water is not available in about 40% of health facilities around the world. And on adolescents specifically, the three most common causes of preventable deaths in adolescents are road injuries, particularly in males, HIV, and self-harm. And in particularly fragile states and humanitarian settings, it's much tougher for women, children, and adolescents. We see that there's still 60% of maternal deaths, 53% of child deaths in such settings. Also, women and girls are at high risk of sexual violence, disease, or death. And particularly around tackling physical or sexual violence outside the home, this is a very important issue as we see that globally 1 in 3 women in the 15 to 49 age group experience violence. So the global community is responding. There's been a stronger global response to SRMNCAH, and there are several frameworks and that are helping drive this agenda. One is the Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted in 2015, and were aligned very closely with the global strategy for women's, children, and adolescent health. The global strategy is essentially a health roadmap for achieving the SDGs. We also have the Lancet Commission on Adolescent Health and Wellbeing. The Lancet is a prestigious journal that covers various global health issues and documents evidence, and PMNCH works closely with the Lancet to make sure that this evidence reaches communities. And the Commission is particularly focused on generating new evidence on adolescent health and well-being. We also have the United Nations Secretary General's Independent Accountability Panel, which is housed here in PMNCH, but runs completely independently with various members from different countries around the world that work together to monitor the progress achieved and the gaps with the global strategy to help perform accountability efforts at country, regional, and global levels. And then finally, we have the Global Financing Facility, which is the main financing mechanism for SRMNCAH, among other financing mechanisms. So I will skip the slide because I think Colin had covered it quite well, and hand it over to Cecilia to discuss, to dive into some of the frameworks that I've outlined, starting with the SDGs.
Hi, everyone. As Mimi mentioned, my name is Cecilia, and I work with Women Deliver, an NGO that works closely with PMNCH and works a lot with young people around the world. And I'm really excited to go over some of the global commitments that are really relevant to adolescent health and are important tools for the adolescent and youth constituency and you as well to both help coordinate the efforts that you're working at the country level and to be able to communicate how they're working towards achieving global goals, and also to help you strategize and to think about how these tools and these guidances can help inform your advocacy at the country level. So we'll start with the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure many of you have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is, the largest framework that we'll be talking about today. The SDGs, as we call them, were adopted in September 2015 at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. And they're a continuation of a set of global commitments that have helped drive sustainable development around the world. The first set of them being the Millennium Development Goals that had preceded the past 15 years. This new set of sustainable development goals were developed through a transparent and inclusive member state-led process where many voices, including the voices of adolescents and young people, were included in deciding the priorities for the next 15 years. And as you can see here, there are 17 goals that span the spectrum of sustainable development. And we can continue to the next slide. Adolescents are central to the SDGs, and whether or not this agenda succeeds will depend on adolescents and young people themselves. This is for a couple of reasons. One of them being that there are currently 1.2 billion adolescents in the world today, the majority of whom live in less developed regions where they often are the majority of people in the population. Second, their experience of engagement or of alienation, including further marginalization, will determine the success or failure of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we also need to remember that adolescents and young people are not only recipients, but they are a driving force for the SDGs, and they will also have to live with the results of the Sustainable Development Goals into their futures. So just as a reminder, this is a demonstration of how many adolescents and youth there are in the world, and the green showing where at least 30% or more of the populations are adolescents of young people. You can see are primarily concentrated in developing countries, including in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and in Latin America. So as I mentioned before, adolescents are central to the development and implementation of the SDGs. Adolescents played a key role in shaping the Sustainable Development Goals through participation in consultations and through advocacy with their member states. And though there is no separate goal on adolescent health and well-being itself, the priorities of adolescent health and adolescents themselves are well reflected across the SDGs. So it is really important for you all to understand that adolescents and young people, that's you, are the Sustainable Development Goal generation that can lead the implementation and achieve the 2030 Agenda. The next couple of slides just showcase a couple of different ways that adolescents are central across the SDGs. You'll see that there are a number of targets across poverty and hunger, health, education, next slide, gender equality, and water and sanitation, for example. where adolescents play a central role in driving the success of the Sustainable Development Goals. We recommend that you read through the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as inequality and urbanization. I apologize. So, and then the next slide. Climate change and environment, peaceful and inclusive societies, and partnerships. So we encourage you to look through the different Sustainable Development Goals and consider the targets that are relevant to your advocacy to help better coordinate the work that you're doing and how they align with the Sustainable Development Goals themselves. So, young people are not the only people that recognize that adolescents and young people are a priority to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals over the next 15 years. There are a number of efforts across policies, programs, and partnerships that are driving the implementation of policies and programs that impact and aim to improve adolescent health and well-being. Some of the policy efforts that are taking place we have talked about, and some of which we have not. But those include commitments to the global strategy for every woman, every child, political declaration on the high-level meeting on HIV, which took place in 2016, and climate change agreements. But there are a number of programs being implemented in country and being developed at the global level that focus on adolescents specifically, including the Joint Program on Child Marriage, the DREAMS Initiative, and the AHA Framework, which I'll talk about, that inform country-level programs. And then partnerships, such as the PMNCH Adolescent and Youth Constituency, and a number of other partnerships, including the PACT, Act 2015, the UN's Major Group on Children and Youth, and the EWEC Adolescent Health Workstream. Through the PMNCH Adolescent and Youth Constituency, you can learn a lot more about those partnerships as well if you're interested in engaging with those more specifically. So what's missing in order to make sure that the SDGs are effectively implemented in a way that improves adolescent health and well-being? There are a couple things that we need to work on. One is institutionalizing political commitment to adolescents at the highest level, including with the member states and with the UN Secretary General. A systematic monitoring progress on adolescent health still needs to be developed, and prioritizing multi-sectoral investments in adolescents also needs to be a priority. As Mimi mentioned, the best interventions that improve adolescent and health and well-being are cross-sectoral, and so we also need to have investments across sectors to reflect that. And finally, we need to bring together organizations working for and with adolescents across sectors to drive progress. So there are a couple tools that I'm going to talk about that will help support your advocacy at the country level on adolescent and health and well-being in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. These are the Global Strategy for Women's, Children's, and Adolescents' Health and the Global AHA Framework, both of which have country-level implications that you can find useful in your advocacy efforts. Next slide. As we mentioned before, adolescent health is important to all 17 Sustainable Development Goal targets, and this is also in line with the global strategy where survive, thrive, and transform are the three major areas focusing on adolescent health. Next. The global strategy for adolescent health also includes suggested adolescent health interventions listed below that you can reference when considering how to prioritize your advocacy at the country level. Next. So to summarize, the Global Strategy for Women's, Children's, and Adolescents' Health is a high-level political document that can be used to make sure that countries and organizations alike can commit to 9 action areas that drive progress for women's, children's, and adolescents' health. So there are only a few areas that are specific to adolescent health. The global strategy itself focuses on a continuum of care and a number of focus areas that influence maternal and child health, including adolescent health. Next slide. Here are the 9 focus areas that are a part of the operational framework that I just mentioned, including country leadership, financing for health, health system resilience, individual potential, community engagement, intersectoral action, humanitarian and fragile settings, research and innovation, and accountability. Essentially, through all 9 of these focus areas, the global strategy aims to coordinate progress for across the continuum of care through 60 indicators, 16 of which are actually key indicators and 25 of which are indicators for further development. All of these indicators are the ways that the global strategy aims to track progress in line with the SDGs, but with a specific focus on women's, children's, and adolescent health. Here are an example of some of the indicators specifically related to adolescents. And just like in the SDGs, where we encourage you to consider the specific targets that are relevant to your advocacy, to align your advocacy efforts at the global level. We also encourage you to look at the indicators across the global strategy and more specifically coordinate your advocacy efforts in line with these globally set indicators. So of the 16 key indicators in the global strategy, there are 4 that are specific to adolescents, and 1 that includes adolescence and age disaggregation is specified. And you can see these below as well. Next. And finally, actually, if you want to go back a slide, sorry. So just a few other words about the global strategy. Before we move on, I'd just like to note that the global strategy is a tool for you to garner political commitments towards adolescent health and well-being in your country. We encourage you to go to the Every Woman, Every Child website and see if your country has made a commitment to the global strategy. And if not, consider the ways that you can make sure your country makes a commitment or drive progress for adolescent health and well-being in line with this global strategy. It also can be a really good reference tool for you when thinking about how to justify your advocacy efforts at the local level and at the country level. It's a really helpful framework for you to use with policymakers, with parliamentarians, to show that these issues that you care about and that you advocate for every day are also relevant on a global scale. Next. The final framework that I'll talk about today is the Global AHA framework. AHA stands for the Global Accelerated Action for the Health of Adolescents Implementation Guidance. But I think it's much easier to just say AHA. So what is the AHA and how is it different from all of the other things we've talked about, like the Sustainable Development Goals and the global strategy? The AHA is the most specific framework that we have focusing on adolescent health and well-being. And what it does is that it aims to help countries decide what to do and how to do it when it comes to adolescent health. So this is more of a technical guidance, and it provides recommendations and best practices around adolescent health and well-being and helps countries prioritize what to do around these issues. Just another note, the Global AHA was launched in May 2017, and that's it. Next slide. An important thing to note that, like the Sustainable Development Goals, the AHA was developed through a consultative process over a period of 2 years. This included both face-to-face and online consultations with a number of adolescents and young people, including various constituencies and members of the PMNCH Adolescents and Youth Constituency. Next. So there are a number of priorities that the AHA framework identifies for adolescents and health and well-being. You can see these listed below. For those of you who focus on adolescent health in your work, these priorities may not be come as a surprise to you, but these are those that are global, have been identified on a global scale. So understanding the AHA framework priorities can help you understand how the context of the advocacy that you're working on at the country level, how that aligns with some of the priorities that have been identified globally here. Next. What's important about the priorities that the AHA framework identified was that these priorities must be driven by the burden of disease in country and risk factors for the future burden of disease, in addition to evidence of effectiveness and local feasibility for implementing programs that mitigate this burden of disease and risk factors. So some things that are important to note include that this involves more than just sex. It's about girls and boys, and that it's about more than the health sector. It also includes the education sector, employment, and on and on. And so it's not just about surviving, but it's about also making sure that adolescents can thrive and transform their societies. So the AHA framework's has significant added value in line with the global strategy and the Sustainable Development Goals. So the AHA essentially provides a way to unpack pieces of the operational framework for the global strategy and provide a guidance on how to make the global strategy relevant and implementable, if that's a word, at the country level, specifically when it comes to adolescent health and well-being. So, like the other two frameworks that we discussed below, or before, we encourage you to also dig into the AHA framework and consider how some of the priority areas identified within the AHA framework are relevant to your country context, and also read through some of the recommended interventions and see if those should be or could be central to your advocacy efforts at all levels. So those are the three frameworks, and after myself, I think we're going to move on to my colleague Carles at IFMSA.
Thank you so much, Cecilia Picalomini, for your presentations. My name is Carlos, and I'm a member of IFMSA, which is the International Federation of Medical Students Associations. It's also part of the Adolescent Youth Constituency of PMNCH. Briefly going to go through some slides to introduce you to the Adolescent Health Package of PMNCH. Basically, the Adolescent Health Package is aimed at advancing adolescent health, and it is a PMNCH package, but it's aimed to be delivered with the leadership of of the Adolescent Youth Constituency and with the help of all the constituencies that are part of PMNCH. Just to provide you a bit of background on the Adolescent Youth Constituency that has already been mentioned before. On October 2015, following the board decision to establish the Adolescent Youth Constituency, we started building it. For instance, in May 2016, we were granted two Adolescent Youth Constituency board seats, and then we had a constituency meeting held in Johannesburg in July 2016, which allowed us to officially make it operational. And through that, once it was operational, the Adolescent Youth Constituency was able to develop an 18-month work plan which is now fully integrated into the PMNCH Adolescent Health package. Once we had this fully operational constituency, the priorities became to build cross-constituency partnerships rather than just standalone platform, expand the reach of the constituency and diversify the movement to be representative of young people from all regions and perspectives. And what I'm going to explain a bit later on, deliver on the adolescent health package, including the 4 big ticket items, which I'm going to get deeper into, and which will be highlighted in this presentation. So it's also interesting to point out how adolescent and youth constituency is also kind of represented in other constituencies. So we have some on the NGO constituency, also on the donors and funders, in the Healthcare Professionals Association, like it's seen in the slide, and also in the Global Financing Mechanisms, the Academic Research and Training Institutions constituency, and the private sector as well as the UN agencies. So moving forward on this adolescent health package, from the AYC, we're focusing on the 4 big ticket items, that we call them, which are the comprehensive adolescent health wellbeing programming approaches under our SO1, the rollout of the Advocacy Toolkit in 5 different countries, which is jointly by the SO1 and SO3, and then we also have the Mentorship Programme under SO4, and the Small Grants Scheme, which is kind of cross SOs. Each one of them will be explained in the following slides. So the next slide shows a bit of information on this country leadership on adolescent health that we were mentioning. So we support comprehensive adolescent health and well-being programs, programming approaches, and we also try to build on existing programs. And on these programs, we try to base them on the latest needs that are evidence-based for each country. And PMNCH also acts as a catalyst for multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder engagement, and we try to support in documentation and operational research as well. So the next big item, like we were mentioning, is the rollout of the Advocacy and Accountability Toolkit. So just to give you a bit of an overview, this toolkit was reviewed by 8 country-level adolescent youth constituency members, and we provided input on the initial version of the toolkit. And then several members of the AYC, as well as other technical partners in countries such as Malawi and India, and also some agencies as WHO and UNFPA also provided their inputs. And to finalize the toolkit, PMNCH also worked together with PMN which kind of implemented the inputs collected from the AYC. The toolkit was launched in May, so not that long ago, and it's designed for young people, by young people, to promote action at the country level. And also, some youth, we're mentioning, some youth-led networks have been identified in different countries, you can see in the slide, to start the rollout of the toolkit. So we aim at it having impact in a national, also regional and global level. And networks will hopefully receive seed grants to develop this national advocacy roadmap and implement it in their countries. So moving on to the third big ticket item that we were mentioning, the small grant scheme, which is we were saying is cross SO, and it's aimed at providing leadership and capacity building grants directly to AYC member organizations to implement their advocacy and accountability work in line with PMNCH's working plan. So basically, this scheme acknowledges that AYC members tend to come from small and often underfunded organizations which may affect their ability to fully engage as part of the partnership. And also essentially means that the work that they put into working for PMNCH and for the constituency normally remains unremunerated. So these sub-grants will help ensure that AYC constituency, AYC constituency members' participation is on par with other PMNCH stakeholders. And also, the oversight of this grant-making process will be provided by a working group, which will be co-chaired by the AYC. Moving on to the mentorship program, like we were mentioning, this program is under the leadership of SO4, and it's basically aimed at creating capacity building and resources sharing platform to improve these aspects of the AYC. And the key components include pulling a pool of learning resources and trying to capture what's the learning process that entails that. Also crafting and adapting a guide for peer-to-peer mentorship and trying to match AYC members with other constituencies, as well as setting aside resources to support the implementation and monitoring of this mentorship program. So currently, we were planning on launching this mentorship program at the end of the summer, and we are actually now through the matching process, which can be shown a bit better with the next slide. So we released a survey to collect information on potential mentors and mentees to make sure that we were matching them according to the needs. And we identify some key priority areas that were the results of the survey. So for instance, from highest to lowest interest, for this mentorship program, we identify advocacy, governance and leadership, accountability, communication, resource mobilization, and sexual, reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, and adolescent health continuum of care. Also, just to provide you an overview with what the survey results were, a lot of people were interested in online mentorship. We had also a high amount of people that had also been experiences with other mentorship programs, and 30% of the people that responded were potential mentors, and 69% were potential mentees. Like we were saying, we're currently in the matching process, and we're matching this back after summer. It's also important to point out that these are our main items, we were mentioning, but we also do a lot of high advocacy, and we try to be present in all those meetings that are relevant to advance adolescent health, to have the AYC represented. It's also important to point out the national and focus that we have in most of our actions. Always, we were saying, trying to support currently existing programs in a country basis. And next slide. Yeah. So this was just a brief overview, but it's also as a reminder to new members or anyone interested. You can review the PMNCH Adolescent Health Package, the full list for 2017, and the activities for the adolescent and youth constituency. And slide. And that's the end of my brief presentation. Just wanted to finish with a sentence that we normally use, that was said by Katia Iverson from Women Deliver. Don't ask what you can do for young people, ask what you can do with young people. So that is kind of our motto. We always try to be engaged, we always try to engage others, we always try to point out the importance of meaningful youth participation and involvement at all levels. And that's it from this side. Thank you.
So thank you very much, everybody that was listening and going through the presentations. I know it was a lot to go over, but very important for you to understand, as well as to equip you and gain the knowledge on how you are going to be functional and effective within the adolescent and youth constituency. Like mentioned earlier, if you want any information, you need clarification and guidance, you can respond to the emails you received from different respective members within the adolescent and youth constituency, especially our board chairperson. So feel free to send an email and ask any questions you'd like to ask. But get ready, we're going to have a great year together, year or two, and it's all about advancing adolescent health in young people. So I hope you're excited as we are. And once again, welcome to the adolescent youth constituency. Thank you.